Chapter 14 The Pole by Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley. It was near the close of day that a travelling calèche coming from Rome was seen approaching at full gallop towards Mola di Gita. The road leading to the inn is rocky and narrow. On one side is an orange grove extending to the sea, on the other an old Roman wall, overgrown by blossoming shrubs, enormous aloes, floating tangles of vines, and 1,000 species of parasite plants peculiar to the south. Scarcely had the calèche entered this defile, when the careless postilion drove one of the wheels over a protruding ledge of rock, and overturned it, and in the next moment a crowd of people came running to the spot. Not one of them, however, thought of relieving the traveller within the fallen vehicle, but with violent gestures and loud outcries, began to examine what damage the calèche had sustained, and what profit they might derive from it. The wheelwright declared every wheel was shattered, the carpenter that the shafts were splintered, whilst the blacksmith, passing and repassing under the carriage, tugged at every clamp and screw and nail, with all the violence necessary to ensure himself a handsome job. The traveller it contained, having quietly disengaged himself from various cloaks, books, and maps, now slowly descended, and for a moment the busy crowd forgot their restlessness to gaze upon the noble figure of the stranger. He seemed to be scarcely 22. In stature he was tall, and his form was moulded in such perfect proportions that it presented a rare combination of youthful lightness and manly strength. His countenance, had you taken from it its deep thoughtfulness and its expression of calm intrepid bravery, might have belonged to the most lovely woman, so transparently blooming was his complexion, so regular his features, so blonde and luxuriant his hair. Of all those present, he seemed the least concerned at the accident. He neither looked at the calèche, nor paid any attention to the offers of service that were screamed from a dozen mouths, but drawing out his watch, asked his servant if the carriage was broken. "Pan, the shafts are snapped, 2 of the springs are injured, and the linchpin has flown." "How long will it take to repair them?" 24 hours. "It is now 4 o'clock. See that everything be in order again by tomorrow's daybreak." "Pan, with these lazy Italians, I fear it will be impossible." "Ye paswalam," replied the traveller coldly but decidedly. "Pay what you will, but let all be ready for the hour I have mentioned." Without another word, he walked towards the inn, followed by the crowd, teasing for alms. A few seconds ago they had all been active and healthy beings, so full of employment they could not afford to mend his calèche unless tempted by some extraordinary reward. Now the men declared themselves cripples and invalids, the children were orphans, the women helpless widows, and they would all die of hunger if His Excellenza did not bestow a few granny. "What a tedious race!" exclaimed the traveller, casting a handful of coins upon the ground, which caused a general scramble and enabled him to proceed unmolested. At the inn new torments awaited him. A fresh crowd, composed of the landlord, the landlady, and their waiters and hostlers, gathered round and assailed him with innumerable questions. The landlord hoped none of his limbs were broken, and begged him to consider himself master of the house. The waiters desired to know at what hour he would sup, what fare he chose, how long he intended to stay, where he came from, whither he was going, and the landlady led him, ostentatiously, through all the rooms of the inn, expatiating endlessly upon the peculiar and indescribable advantages of each. Ineffably weary of their officiousness, the traveller at last traversed a long and spacious hall, and took refuge in a balcony that looked upon the Bay of Gita. The inn is built upon the site of Cicero's villa. Beneath the balcony, and on each side along the whole curve of the bay, stretched a thick grove of orange trees, which sloped down to the very verge of the Mediterranean. Balls of golden fruit, and blossoms faint with odour and fair as stars, studded this amphitheatre of dark foliage, and at its extremity the liquid light of the waves pierced the glossy leaves, mingling their blue splendour with earth's green paradise. Every rock and mountain glowed with a purple hue, so intense and soft, they resembled violet vapours dissolving into the pale radiance of the evening sky. Far away in the deep broad flood of the ocean rose the 2 mountain islands of Ischia and Procida, between which Vesuvius thrust in his jagged form, and his floating banner of snow-white smoke. The solitary heaven was without sun or moon, without a star or cloud, but smiled in that tender vestal light which speaks of eternal immutable peace. It would be difficult to define the feelings of the traveller as he gazed on this scene. His countenance, uplifted to heaven, was animated with a profound and impassioned melancholy, with an expression of an earnest and fervid pleading against some vast and inevitable wrong. He was thinking of his country, and whilst he contrasted its ruined villages and devastated fields with the splendour and glow of the fair land before him, was breathing inwardly a passionate appeal against that blind and cruel destiny which had consigned Poland to the desolating influence of Russian despotism. His reverie was interrupted by the sound of a female voice singing in Polish among the orange trees at his feet. The singer was invisible, but the sweetness of her voice, and the singular reference of the words, the following prose translation conveys their meaning to the thoughts of his own mind, filled the traveller with surprise. When thou gazest upon the azure heaven, so mighty in its calm, do not say, O bright enchantment, hast thou no pity, that thou dawnest thus in unattainable loveliness upon my world-wearied eyes. When the southern wind softly breathes, do not say reproachfully, thy cradle is the ether of the morning sun, thou drinkest the odorous essence of myrtle and lemon blossoms. Thou shouldst bear upon thy wings all sweet emotions, all soft desires. Why bringest thou then no healing to the anguish I endure? Neither in the dark hour, when thou thinkest upon thy country and thy friends, say not with grief they are lost, they are not, say rather with joy they were illustrious, and it is bliss to know that they have been. It were wise in me to obey thy lesson, sweet songstress, thought the traveller, and revolving in his mind the singularity of the serenade, he continued to gaze upon the trees below. There was no rustling amid their branches, no sound which told a human being was concealed beneath their foliage. Nothing was heard beyond the almost imperceptible breathings of the evening air. Did such things exist anywhere but in the imagination of the poet? He could almost have believed that the spirit of that divine scene had assumed a human voice and human words to soothe his melancholy. So floating and airy had been the strain, so deep the silence that succeeded it. One moment more, and there arose from the same spot cries for help uttered in Italian, and shrieks of distress so piercing, they made the traveller fly with the speed of lightning through the great hall, down the staircase into the garden. The first object that met his eyes was the figure of a girl about 16, her one arm tightly embracing the stem of a tree, her other angrily repelling a young man who was endeavouring to drag her away. I will not go with you, I love you no longer, Giorgio, and go with you I will not, shrieked the girl, in tones of mingled violence and fear. You must, you shall, retorted her aggressor in a voice of thunder. I have found you again, and I won't be duped by your fooleries, Marietta. And who are you, and who begged you to interfere? Added he, turning fiercely upon the traveller, whose strong grasp had torn him from Marietta. An officer, as it should seem by your dress. Be pleased to know that I am also an officer, and risk my displeasure no further. No officer would ill-treat a defenceless girl, the Pole replied with quiet contempt. At this taunt Giorgio quivered with rage. His features, handsome and regular as those of Italians generally are, became quite distorted. His hands with convulsive movements sought about his breast for the dagger that was concealed there, his dark flashing eyes fixed intently at the same time upon his adversary, as if he hoped the fiendish spirit that burned within them might previously annihilate him. Be on your guard, he is a perfect wretch, cried Marietta, rushing towards her protector. The arrival of several servants from the inn dispelled all idea of present danger. They dragged off Giorgio, telling him that, although the girl was his sister, he had no right to separate her from the corps d'opera, with whom she was travelling through Gaeta. E vero, e verissimo, cried Marietta with joyful triumph. What is it to him if I like my liberty and prefer wandering about, singing here and there? Marietta, beware, dare not to speak ill of me, screamed the retiring Giorgio, looking back over his shoulder, and accompanying his words with a look of such frightful menace as completely subdued his sister. She watched in anxious silence till he had disappeared, and then, with affectionate humility and a graceful quickness that allowed not of its prevention, knelt lightly down, and pressed the stranger's hand to her lips. You have more than repaid me for the song I sang to you, she said, rising and leading the way to the inn, and if you like it I will sing others to you whilst you sup. Are you a Pole? Inquired the traveller. A fine demand. How can I be a Pole? Did you not say yourself there was no longer any such country as Poland? Not that I recollect. If you did not say it, confess at least that you thought it. The Poles are all become Russians, and for nothing in the world, signor, would I be a Russian. Why, in all their language they have no word that expresses honour. No, rather than be a Russian, much as I hate it, I would go with Giorgio. Are you an Italian? No, not exactly. What are you then? I am what I am, who can be more? But, signor, one thing I must beg of you, do not ask me any questions about myself, nor any about Giorgio. I will sing to you, talk to you, wait upon you, anything of that kind you please, but I will not answer questions on those subjects. Seating herself upon a stool, in a dark corner of the traveller's apartment, as far removed as possible from him, and all other interruptions, Marietta passed the evening in playing on her guitar and singing. She was a most accomplished singer, possessing and managing all the intricacies of the art with perfect ease, but this scarcely excited admiration in comparison with the natural beauty of her voice. There was a profound melancholy in its intense sweetness that dissolved the soul of the traveller in grief. All that was dear to him in the memory of the past, the joys of home and childhood, the tenderness and truth of his first friendships, the glow of patriotism, every cherished hour, every endeared spot, all that he had loved and all that he had lost upon earth, seemed again to live and again to fade, as he listened to her strains. Without paying any attention to him, and apparently without any effort to herself, she breathed forth melody after melody for her own pleasure, like some lone nightingale, that in a home of green leaves, sings to cheer its solitude with sweet sounds. Her countenance and figure would have been beautiful had they been more fully developed. They resembled those sketches of a great artist in which there are only a few lightly traced lines, but those so full of spirit and meaning that you easily imagine what a masterpiece it would have been when finished. The first visit of our traveller on arriving next day at Naples was to the Princess Dashkoff. She was a Russian lady, whose high birth, immense wealth and talents for intrigue had procured for her the intimacy of half the crowned heads of Europe, and had made her all-powerful at the court of St. Petersburg. Detesting the cold barbarism of her native country, she had established herself at Naples, in a splendid mansion near the Strada Nuova, and affecting an extravagant admiration for Italy by her munificent patronage of the arts and artists, and by perpetual exhibitions of her own skill, in drawing and singing, dancing and acting, had obtained the name of the coroner of the North. Her salon was the evening resort of the wise, the idle, the witty, and the dissipated. Not to know coroner was to be yourself unknown, and not to frequent her conversazioni was, as far as society was concerned, to be banished from all that was fashionable or delightful in Naples. It was the hour of evening reception. The Pole burned with impatience to speak to the princess, for on her influence at Petersburg depended the fate of his only brother. A splendid suite of apartments blazing with lights, crowded with company, lay open before him. Without allowing himself to be announced, he entered them. When a highly imaginative mind is absorbed by some master feeling, all opposing contrasts, all glowing extremes, serve but to add depth and intensity to that feeling. The festal scene of marble columns garlanded by roses, the walls of Venetian mirror, reflecting the light of innumerable tapers, and the forms of lovely women and gay youths floating in the mazy dance, seemed to him deceitful shows that veiled some frightful sorrow. And with eager, rapid steps, as if borne along by the impulse of his own thoughts, he hurried past them. Scarcely knowing how he had arrived there, he at length found himself standing beside the princess, in a marble colonnade, open above to the moonlight and the stars of heaven, and admitting at its sides the odours of the blossoming almond trees of the adjacent gardens. "Ladislas," exclaimed the lady, starting, "is it possible to see you here almost exceeds belief." After remaining some moments in deep silence, collecting and arranging his thoughts, the Pole replied. A conversation ensued, in so low a voice as to be only audible to themselves. From their attitudes and gestures, it might be inferred that Ladislas was relating some tale of deep anguish, mixed with solemn and impressive adjurations, to which the princess listened with a consenting, tranquilizing sympathy. They issued from the recess, walked up the colonnade, and entered a small temple that terminated it. From the center of its airy dome hung a lighted alabaster lamp of a boat-like shape, beneath which a youthful female was seated alone, sketching a range of moonlight hills that appeared between the columns. "Idly," said the princess, "I have brought you a new subject for your pencil, and such a subject, my love, one whose fame has already made him dear to your imagination, no less a person than the hero of Ostrolenka and the Vistula. So call up one of those brightest, happiest moods of your genius, in which all succeeds to you, and enrich my album with his likeness," spreading it before her. He stationed his band in a small wood that lay directly in the path of the Russians, and checked their progress for the space of 3 hours. Every tree of that wood now waves above a patriot's grave. In the meantime the Polish army formed, bore down, and gained a brilliant victory. It is difficult to refuse any request to a person who has just granted us an important favour. Ladislas suffered himself to be seated, and as soon as the princess had quitted them, the gloom which had shadowed his brow at the names of Ostralenka and the Vistula vanished. The surpassing beauty of the young artist would have changed the heaviest penance into a pleasure. She was lovely as one of Raphael's Madonnas, and like them, there was a silent beauty in her presence that struck the most superficial beholder with astonishment and satisfaction. Her hair of a golden and burnished brown, the colour of the autumnal foliage illuminated by the setting sun, fell in gauzy wavings round her face, throat and shoulders, her small, clear forehead, gleaming with gentle thought, her curved, soft and rosy lips, the delicate moulding of the lower part of the face expressing purity and integrity of nature were all perfectly Grecian. Her hazel eyes with their arched lids and dark arrowy lashes pierced the soul with their full and thrilling softness. She was clad in long and graceful drapery, white as snow, but pure as this garment was, it seemed a rude disguise to the resplendent softness of the limbs it enfolded. The delicate light that gleamed from the alabaster lamp above them was a faint simile of the ineffable spirit of love that burned within Idylli's fair, transparent frame, and the one trembling, shining star of evening that palpitates responsively to happy lovers never seemed more divine or more beloved than she did to Ladislas, as she sat there, now fixing a timid but attentive gaze upon his countenance, and then dropping it upon the paper before her. And not alone for Ladislas was this hour the dawn of passionate love. The same spell was felt in the heart of Idylli. One moment their eyes met and glanced upon each other, the look of exalted, eternal love, mute, blessed, and inexpressible. Their lids fell and were raised no more. Rapture thrilled their breasts and swelled their full hearts, for motionless and in deep silence, as if every outward faculty were absorbed in reverence, they continued, each inwardly knowing, hearing, seeing nothing but the divine influence and attraction of the other. I know not if the portrait was finished. I believe it was not. Noiselessly Idylli arose and departed to seek the princess, and Ladislas followed. "Who is that lovely being?" inquired an English traveller some time afterward, pointing out Idylli from a group of ladies. "A Polish girl, a protégée of mine," was the reply of the princess, "a daughter of one of Kosciuszko's unfortunate followers who died here, poor and unknown. She has a great genius for drawing and painting, but she is so different in her nature from the generality of people that I am afraid she will never get on in the world. All the family are wild and strange. There is a brother who they say is a complete ruffian, brave as a Pole and as unprincipled as an Italian, a villain quite varnished in picturesque, like one of your Lord Byron's corsairs and giaours. Then there is a younger sister, the most uncontrollable little creature, who chose to pretend my house was insupportable, and ran away into Calabria or Campagna, and set up as a prima donna. But these, to be sure, are the children of a second wife, an Italian, and Idylli, I must confess, has none of their lawlessness, but is remarkably gentle and steady." Disgusted with this heartless conversation, which disturbed his ecstasy, Ladislas hastily quitted the Dashkoff Palace, and entered the Villa Real, whose embowering trees promised solitude. Not one straggler of the gay crowds that frequent this luxurious garden from morning till midnight was now to be seen, with its straight walks buried in gloom and shadow, its stone fonts of sleeping water, its marble statues, its heaven-pointing obelisks, and its midnight air. It was silent as a deserted oratory. When the last strain of the Vesper hymn has died away, the last taper has ceased to burn, the last censer has been flung, and both priests and worshippers have departed, Ladislas cast himself upon a stone seat in the ilex grove that skirts the margin of the bay. "I dreamt not of love," he exclaimed. "I sought her not. I had renounced life and all its train of raptures, hopes, and joys. Cold and void of every wish, the shadow of death lay upon my heart. Suddenly she stood before me, lovely as an angel that heralds departed spirits to the kingdom of eternal bliss. Fearless but mild, she poured the magic of her gaze upon my soul. I speak the word of the hour. She shall be mine, or I will die." Reclining in the ilex grove, Ladislas passed the remaining hours of that too short night, entranced in bliss, as if the bright form of his beloved was still shining beside him. Gradually, every beauty of the wondrous and far-famed Bay of Naples impressed itself upon his attention, the broad and beamless moon sinking behind the tall elms of Pasilippo, the broken starlight on the surface of the waves, their rippling sound as they broke at his feet, Sorrento's purple promontory, and the gentle wind that blew from it, the solitary grandeur of Capri's mountain island rising out of the middle of the bay, a colossal sphinx guarding 2 baths of azure light, Vesuvius breathing its smoke and flame and sparks in the cloudless ether. All became mingled in inexplicable harmony with his newborn passion, and were indelibly associated with his recollection of that night. The next morning Idly was sketching in the villa reel. She had seated herself on the outside of a shady alley. 2 persons passed behind her, and the childish, petulant voice of one of them drew her attention. That voice, so sweet even in its impatience, certainly belonged to her fugitive sister. "It is she," exclaimed Idly, gliding swift as thought between the trees and folding the speaker to her bosom. "Marietta, my dear little Marietta, at last you are come back again. Catavella, now promise to stay with me. You know not how miserable I have been about you." "No, I cannot promise anything of the kind," replied Marietta, playing with the ribbons of her guitar. "I choose to have my liberty." Idly's arms sunk, and her eyes were cast upon the ground when she heard the cold and decided tone in which this refusal was pronounced. On raising the latter, they glanced upon the companion of her sister, and were filled with unconquerable emotion at discovering Ladislas, the elected of her heart. "I met your sister here a few minutes ago," explained he, partaking her feelings, "and having been so fortunate the other day as to render her a slight service." "Oh yes," interrupted Marietta, "I sung for him a whole evening at Gita. It was a curious adventure." His carriage was overturned close to the inn. I had arrived there half an hour before, and was walking in an orange grove near the spot, and saw the accident happen, and heard him speak in Polish to his servant. My heart beat with joy. He looked wondrous melancholy. I thought it must be about his country, so I crept as softly as a mouse among the trees under his balcony, and sung him a salve song in Polish. I improvised it on the spur of the moment. I do not very well recollect it, but it was about azure heavens, southern winds, myrtle and lemon blossoms, and the illustrious unfortunate, and it ought to have pleased him. Just as I had finished, out starts our blessed brother Giorgio from the inn, and began one of his most terrific bothers. Imagine how frightened I was, for I thought he was gone to Sicily with his regiment. However, they got him away, and I followed this stranger into his room, and sang to him the rest of the evening all my best songs, the Mio ben quando vera, Nina pazza per amore, the All Army of Generali, the Dolce cara patria from Tancredi, the Dei Karma from Otello, all my whole stock I assure you, thus rattled on Marietta, and then, as if her quick eye had already discovered the secret of their attachment, she added with an arch smile, "But don't be frightened, Idly," though his eyes filled with tears whilst I sung, "as yours often do, not a word of praise did the Sarmatian bestow on me. Then return and live with me, dear Marietta, and I will praise you as much and more than you desire." Santa Maria del Pi di Grata, what a tiresome person you are, Idly. When you have got an idea into your head, an earthquake would not get it out again. Have I not told you that I will not? If you knew the motive you would approve my resolution. I said I liked my liberty and so forth, but that was not the reason of my flight. I do not choose to have anything to do with Giorgio and the princess, for believe me, dearest Idly, disgraceful as my present mode of life seems to you, it is innocence itself compared with the crimes they were leading me into. Some suspicion of this did once cross my mind, her sister replied with a sigh, but I rejected it as too horrible. Dear child, think no more about them. Do you not know that I have left the princess' house and am living by myself in a little pavilion far up on the Strada Nuova? There you need not fear their molestations. Is not Giorgio then with you? No, I have not seen him for some time. I doubt if he be in Naples. So, Messer Giorgio, you have deceived me again. But I might have known that, for he never speaks a word of truth. Be assured, however, he is in Naples, for I caught a glimpse of him this morning, mounting the hill that leads to the barracks at Pizzafalcone, and he is as intimate with the princess as ever, though she pretends to disown him. As for me, I am engaged at San Carlo's. The writing is signed and sealed and cannot be broken without forfeiting a heavy sum of money. Otherwise I should be happy to live peacefully with you, for you know not, Idly, all I have had to suffer, how sad and ill-treated I have been, how often pinched with want and hunger, and worse than that, when Giorgio takes it into his head to pursue me, and plants himself in the pit, fixing his horrible looks upon me as I sing. How many times I have rushed out of the theatre, and spent the nights in the great wide Maremma, beset by robbers, buffaloes, and wild boars, till I was almost mad with fear and bewilderment. There is a curse upon our family, I think. Did not our father once live in a splendid castle of his own with 100 retainers to wait upon him? And do you remember the miserable garret in which he died? But I cannot stay any longer. I am wanted at the rehearsal, so farewell, dearest Idly. Be you at least happy, and leave me to fulfill the evil destiny that hangs over our race. No, no, exclaimed Ladislas, that must not be, the writing must be cancelled. And then, with the affection and unreserve of a brother, he entered into their sentiments. With sweet and persuasive arguments overcame their scruples of receiving a pecuniary obligation from him, and finally, taking Marietta by the hand, led her away to San Carlos in order to cancel her engagement. And in another hour it was cancelled. Marietta was once more free and joyful, and affectionate as old friends. The three met again in the little pavilion which was Idale's home. It stood alone in a myrtle wood on the last of the green promontories which form the Strada Nuova, and separate the Bay of Naples from the Bay of Baia. A lonely hermitage secluded from the noise and turmoil of the city, whose only visitors were the faint winds of morning and evening, the smiles of the fair Italian heaven, its wandering clouds, and perchance a solitary bird. From every part of the building you could see the bay and ocean sparkling breathlessly beneath the sun. Through the windows and the columns of the portico you beheld the mountains of the distant coast shining on, hour after hour, like amethysts in a thrilling vapour of purple transparent light, so ardent yet halcyon, so bright and unreal. A poet would have chosen it to emblem the radiant atmosphere that glows around Elysian isles of eternal peace and joy. Marietta soon left the building to join some fisher boys who were dancing the tarantella upon the beach below. Idale took her drawing, which was her daily employment, and furnished her the means of subsistence, and Ladislas sat by her side. There was no sound of rolling carriages, no tramp of men and horse, no distant singing, no one speaking near. The wind awoke no rustling amid the leaves of the myrtle wood, and the wave died without a murmur on the shore. Ladislas' deep but melodious voice alone broke the crystal silence of the noonday air. Italy was around him, robed in two splendours of blue and green, but he was an exile, and the recollections of his native land thronged into his memory. During the 3 months it had taken him to effect his escape from Warsaw to Naples, his lips had been closed in silence, whilst his mind had been wrapped in the gloom of the dreadful images that haunted it. In Idale's countenance there was that expression of innocence and sublimity of soul, of purity and strength, that excited the warmest admiration, and inspired sudden and deep confidence. She looked like some supernatural being that walks through the world, untouched by its corruptions, like one that unconsciously, yet with delight, confers pleasure and peace, and Ladislas felt that, in speaking to her of the dark sorrows of his country, they would lose their mortal weight and be resolved into beauty by her sympathy. In glowing terms he described the heroic struggle of Poland for liberty, the triumph and exultation that had filled every bosom during the few months they were free, the hardships and privations they had endured, the deeds of daring bravery of the men, the heroism it had awakened in the women, and, then its fall, the return of the Russians, the horrible character of Russian despotism, its sternness and deceit, its pride and selfish ignorance, the loss of public and private integrity, the disbelief of good, the blighted, hopeless, joyless life endured by those whom it crushes beneath its servitude. Thus passed the hours of the forenoon. Then Ladislas, fixing his eyes upon the coast of Baia, and expressing at the same time his impatience to visit that ancient resort of heroes and of emperors, idly led the way by a small path down the hill to the beach. There they found a skiff, and, unmooring it from its rocky haven, embarked in it. It had been sweet to mark the passage of that light bark freighted with these happy lovers. When borne by its sails, it swept through the little ocean channel that lies between the beaked promontories of the mainland and the closing cliffs of the island of Nisida. And when with gentler motion it glided into the open expanse of the Bay of Baia, and cut its way through the translucent water, above the ruins of temples and palaces overgrown by seaweed, on which the rays of the sun were playing, creating 1,000 rainbow hues, that varied with every wave that flowed over them. In all that plain of blue light it was the only moving thing, and as if it had been the child of the ocean that bore it, and the sun that looked down on it, it sped gaily along in their smiles past the fortress where Brutus and Cassius sought shelter after the death of Caesar, past the temples of Jupiter and Neptune, by the ruins of that castle in which 3 Romans once portioned out the world between them, to the Cumaean hill that enshadows the beloved Linternum of Scipio Africanus, and in which he died. The whole of this coast is a paradise of natural beauty, investing with its own loveliness the time-eaten wrecks with which it is strewn. The mouldering past is mingled with the vivid present. Ruin and grey annihilation are decked in eternal spring. The woody windings of the shore reveal in their deep recesses the gleaming marble fragments of the abodes of ancient heroes. The verdurous hues of the promontories mingle with the upright columns of shattered temples, or clothe, with nature's voluptuous bloom, the pale funereal urns of departed gods, whilst the foliage and the inland fountains, and the breaking waves upon the shore, were murmuring around their woven minstrelsy of love and joy. Earth, sea, and sky blazed like three gods with tranquil but animated loveliness, with a splendor that did not dazzle, with a richness that could not satiate. The air on that beautiful warm coast was as a field of fragrance. The refreshing sea breeze seemed to blow from paradise, quickening the senses, and bringing to them the odor of 1,000 unknown blossoms. "What world is this?" exclaimed Ladislas in a tone of rapture that nearly answered its own question. I could imagine I had entered an enchanted garden. 4 heavens surround me, the one above, the pure element beneath me with its waves that shine and tremble as stars, the adorned earth that hangs over it, and the heaven of delight they create within my breast. Morning is here a rose, day a tulip, night a lily. Evening is like morning again a rose, and life seems a choral hymn of beautiful and glowing sentiments that I go singing to myself as I wander along this perpetual path of flowers. It was night ere they again reached the pavilion. It stood dark and deserted in the clear moonshine. The door was locked. After calling and knocking repeatedly without obtaining any answer, it became evident that Marietta had quitted the dwelling. In the first moment of surprise which this occurrence occasioned, they had not observed a written sheet of paper, of a large size, which lay unfolded and placed directly before the door, as if to attract attention. Idly took it up and read the following lines, traced by Marietta. "Oh, Idly, but a few hours ago how calm and secure we were in happiness, now danger and perhaps destruction is our portion. One chance yet remains. The moment you get this, persuade, not only persuade, but compel that adorable stranger to fly instantly from Naples. He is not safe here an instant longer. Do not doubt what I say, or his life may be the forfeit. How can I impress this on your mind? I would not willingly betray anyone, but how else can I save him? Giorgio has been here. Oh, the frightful violence of that man. He raved like an insane person and let fall such dark and bloody hints as opened worlds of horror to me. I am gone to discover what I can. I know his haunts and his associates, and shall soon find out if there be any truth in what he threatens. I could not await your return, neither dare I leave the pavilion open. Who knows if, in the interval between my departure and your return, an assassin might not conceal himself within, and your first welcome be, to see the stranger fall lifeless at your feet. His every step is watched by spies armed for his destruction. I know not what to do, and yet it seems to me that my going may possibly avert the catastrophe." Ladislas listened to these lines unmoved, but the effect they produced on Idly was dreadful. She gave implicit credence to them, and every word sounded as a knell. She lost all presence of mind. Every reflection that might have taught her to avert the stroke she so much dreaded was swallowed up in anguish, as if the deed that was to be consummated were already done. What task can be more difficult than to describe the overwhelming agony which heavy and unexpected misery produces? To have lived the day that Idly had just lived, a day in which all the beauty of existence had been unveiled to its very depths, to have dreamt, as she had done, a dream of love that steeped her soul in divine and almost uncommunicable joy, and now to sink from this pinnacle of happiness into a black and lampless cavern, the habitation of death, whose spectral form and chilling spirit was felt through all the air. This is but a feeble metaphor of the sudden transition from rapture to misery which Idly experienced. She looked upon Ladislas, and beheld him bright and full of life, the roseate hues of health upon his cheek, his eyes beaming with peaceful joy, his noble countenance varying not in the least from that imperturbable self-possession which was its habitual expression. And as her imagination made present to her the fatal moment, when beneath the dagger of the assassin this adored being should sink bleeding, wounded, and then be forever lost in death, her blood rushed to her heart, a deadly pause ensued, from which she awoke in a bewildering mist of horror. Ladislas beheld her excess of emotion with pain, in which, however, all was not pain, for it was blended with that triumphant exultation that a lover ever feels when he for the first time becomes assured that he is beloved by the object of his love with an affection tender and intense as his own. As soon as Idly recovered some presence of mind, with passionate supplications she entreated Ladislas to leave her, to fly this solitary spot, and to seek safety amid the crowded streets of Naples. He would not hear of this. He gently remonstrated with her upon the unreasonableness of her terrors, urging how little probable it was that his passing rencontre with Giorgio at Gaeta could have awakened in him such a deadly spirit of revenge as Marietta represented. He viewed the whole thing lightly, attributing it either to the vivacity of Marietta's imagination, which had made her attach a monstrous import to some angry expressions of her brother, or looking upon it as a merry device which she had contrived in order to frighten them. and tranquilized idly by assurances that they would shortly see her wild sister return laughing, and full of glee at the success of her plot. In this expectation 2 hours passed away, but still no Marietta appeared, and it had grown too late to seek another shelter without exposing idly to the slander of evil-minded people. They passed the rest of the night therefore in the portico, idly sometimes pale and breathless with recurring fears, and sometimes calm and happy, as Ladislas poured forth his tale of passionate love. His feelings, on the contrary, were pure and unalloyed. Where idly was, there was the whole universe to him. Where she was not, there was only a formless void. He had an insatiable thirst for her presence, which only grew intenser with the enjoyment of its own desire, and he blessed the fortunate occurrence that prolonged his bliss during hours which otherwise would have been spent pining in absence from her. No other considerations intruded. Blessings kindled within his eyes as he gazed upon that lovely countenance and faultless form, and angels might have envied his happiness. Morning came, bright and serene. The sun arose, the ocean and the mountains again resumed their magic splendor. The myrtle woods and every minuter bloom of the garden shone out beneath the sun, and the whole earth was a happy form made perfect by the power of light. They recollected that they had promised to join the Princess Dashkoff and a large party of her friends at 8 o'clock in an excursion to Pia Stum. The point of meeting was the shore of the Villa Real, where the numerous guests were to embark in a steamer which had been engaged for the occasion. In idly's present homeless and uncertain condition, this plan offered some advantages. It would enable them to pass the day in each other's society under the auspices of the princess, and it was to be hoped that on their return the mystery of Marietta's disappearance would be unravelled, and idly find her home once more open to her. They had scarcely settled to go, ere one of those horse calesini which ply in the streets of Naples was seen coming towards them. Its driver, a ragged boy, sat on the shaft, singing as he drove. Another urchin, all in tatters, stood as lacquey behind, and between them sat Marietta. The paleness of fear was on her cheeks, and her eyes had the staggered, affrighted look of one who has gazed upon some appalling horror. She hastily descended, and bade the calesino retire to some distance, and await further orders. "Why is he yet here?" said she to her sister. "You foolish, blind idly, why did you not mind my letter? Too proud, I suppose, to obey any but yourself. But mark, you would not hear my warnings. We shall lose him, and you will feel them in your heart's core." She then, with all the violent gesticulation of an Italian, threw herself at the feet of Ladislas, and with a countenance that expressed her own full conviction in what she said, besought him to fly instantly, not only from Naples but from Italy, for his life would never be safe in that land of assassins and traitors. With entreaties almost as violent as her own, Ladislas and idly urged her to explain, but this only threw her into a new frenzy. She declared the peril was too urgent to admit of explanation. Every moment was precious. Another hour's stay in Naples would be his death. The situation of Ladislas was a curious one. He had served in the Russian campaigns against Persia and Turkey, and had been there daily exposed to the chances of destruction. In the late struggle between Poland and Russia, he had performed actions of such determined and daring bravery as had made his name a glory to his countrymen, and a terror to their enemies. In all these exploits he had devoted himself so unreservedly to death, that his escape was considered as a miraculous interposition of heaven. It was not to be expected that this Mars in a human form, this Achilles who had braved death in 1,000 shapes, should now consent to fly before the uplifted finger and visionary warnings of a dreamsick girl, for such Marietta appeared to him to be. He pitied her sufferings, endeavoured to soothe her, but asserted he had seen no reason that could induce him to quit Naples. A full quarter of an hour elapsed before an explanation could be wrung from Marietta. The chaos that reigned in her mind may easily be imagined. She had become possessed of a secret which involved the life of 2 persons. Ladislas refused to save himself unless she revealed what might place her brother's life in jeopardy. Whichever way she looked, destruction closed the view. Nature had bestowed on her a heart exquisitely alive to the sufferings of others, a mind quick in perceiving the nicest lines of moral rectitude, and strenuous in endeavouring to act up to its perceptions. Any deviations in her conduct from these principles had been the work of a fate that, strong and fierce as a tempest, had bent down her weak youth like a reed beneath its force. She had once loved Giorgio. He had played with and caressed her in infancy, with the fond patronage of an elder brother, had procured her the only indulgences her orphaned childhood had ever known. Fraternal love called loudly on her not to endanger his life, gratitude as loudly called on her not to allow her benefactor to become his victim. This last idea was too horrible to be endured. The present moment is ever all-powerful with the young, and Marietta related what she knew. Well might the poor child be wild and disordered. She had passed the night in the catacombs of San Gennaro, under Capo di Monte. In these subterranean galleries were held the nightly meetings of the band of desperate bravi, of whom Giorgio was in secret the chief. The entrance to the catacombs is in a deserted vineyard, and is overgrown by huge aloes, rooted in stones and sharp rocks. They lift their thorny leaves above the opening, and conceal it effectually. A solitary fig tree that grows near renders the spot easily recognizable by those already acquainted with the secret. The catacombs themselves are wide winding caves, the burial place of the dead of past ages. Piles of human bones, white and bleached by time, are heaped along the rocky sides of these caverns. In one of these walks, whilst they were friends, Giorgio had shown the place to Marietta. In those days he feared not to entrust his mysterious way of life to her. For although in all common concerns she was wild and untractable, yet in all that touched the interests of those few whom she loved, Marietta was silent and reserved as Epicurus herself. The menaces Giorgio let fall in his visit on the preceding forenoon had excited her highest alarm, and she determined, at any risk, to learn the extent of the danger that hung over the stranger. After waiting in vain for Idili's return till the close of evening, she had hastened to Capo di Monte, entered the catacombs alone, and, concealed behind a pile of bones, had awaited the arrival of the Confederates. They assembled at midnight. Their first subject of consultation was the stranger. Giorgio acquainted them with his history, which he told them had been communicated to him that very morning by a Russian lady of high rank, who had likewise charged him with the business he had to unfold to them. He described Ladislas as a fugitive, unprotected by any government. He bore about his person certain papers which had been found in the Palace of Warsaw, and were the confidential communications of the Russian autocrat to his brother, the Viceroy of Poland, and were of such a nature as to rouse all Europe against their writer. These papers had been entrusted to Ladislas, whose intention was to proceed to Paris and publish them there. Private business, however, of the greatest importance, had forced him to visit Naples first. The Russian government had traced him to Naples, and had empowered a certain Russian lady to take any step, or go any lengths, in order to obtain these papers from Ladislas. This lady had made Giorgio her emissary. Her name he carefully concealed, but Marietta averred from his description that it could be no other than the Princess Dashkoff. After much consulting among the band, the assassination of the Pole had been decided upon. This seemed to be the only sure method, for he carried the papers ever about his person, was distinguished for his bravery, and if openly attacked would resist to the last. Giorgio was no stickler in the means he employed, and told his companions he had the less reason to be so in this case, as he had received assurances from the highest quarter that his crime should go unpunished, and the reward be enormous. Ladislas was almost unknown in Naples. The government would not interest itself for a fugitive without passport, country, or name, and what friends had he here to inquire into the circumstances of his destruction, or to interest themselves to avenge it? Such was Marietta's tale, and Ladislas instantly acknowledged the necessity of flight. He was too well acquainted with Russian perfidy to doubt that even a lady of a rank so distinguished as the Princess Dashkoff might be induced to undertake as foul a task as that attributed to her by Marietta. The worldly and artificial manners of this lady in an Italian or a Frenchwoman would only have resulted from habits of intrigue. But a Russian, unaccustomed to look on human life as sacred, taught by the government of her own country that cruelty and treachery are venial offences, wholly destitute of a sense of honour, concealed under such an exterior vices the most odious, and a callousness to guilt unknown in more civilized lands. Ladislas knew this, and he knew that the badness of the Neapolitan government afforded scope for crime, which could not exist elsewhere, and he felt that on every account it were better to withdraw himself immediately from the scene of danger. While musing on these things, Idili's beseeching eyes were eloquent in imploring him to fly. He consented, but a condition was annexed to his consent that Idili should share his flight. He urged his suit with fervour. It were easy for them on a very brief notice to seek the young lady's confessor, induce him to bestow on them the nuptial benediction, and thus to sanctify their departure together. Marietta seconded the lover's entreaties, and Idili, blushing and confused, could only reply, "My accompanying you would but increase your danger, and facilitate the bravo's means of tracing you. How could I get a passport? How leave this place?" "I have a plan for all," replied Ladislas, and he then related that the Sully steam packet lay in the harbour of Naples, ready to sail on the shortest notice. He would engage that for their conveyance, and so speedily bid adieu to the shores of Naples and all its perils. "But that boat," exclaimed idly, "is the very one engaged by the princess for the excursion to Piastum." This, for a time, seemed to disarrange their schemes, but they considered that no danger could happen to Ladislas while one of a party of pleasure with the princess, who from this act of his would be quite unsuspicious of his intended departure. At night, upon their return from Piastum, when the rest of the party should have disembarked at Naples, Ladislas and Idly would remain on board, and the vessel immediately commence its voyage for France. This plan thus assumed a very feasible appearance, while Ladislas, in accents of fond reproach, asked Idly wherefore she refused to share his fortunes and accompany him in his journey, and Marietta, clapping her hands, exclaimed, "She consents. She consents. Do not ask any more, she has already yielded. We will all return to Naples. Ladislas shall go immediately to seek out the captain of the Sully and arrange all with him, while without loss of time we will proceed to the convent of Father Basil and get everything ready by the time Ladislas shall join us, which must be with as much speed as he can contrive." Idly silently acquiesced in this arrangement, and Ladislas kissed her hand with warm and overflowing gratitude. They now contrived to stow themselves in the little Calesino, and as they proceeded on their way, Ladislas said, "We seem to have forgotten the future destiny of our dear Marietta all this time. The friendless condition in which we shall leave her fills me with anxiety. She is the preserver of my life, and we are both under the deepest obligations to her. What shall you do, Marietta, when we are gone?" "Fear not for me," exclaimed the wild girl. "It is necessary I should remain behind to arrange those things which Idly's sudden departure will leave in sad disorder. But you will see me soon in Paris, for how can I exist apart from my sister?" When near to Naples, Ladislas alighted from the Calesino and directed his steps towards the port, while the fair girls proceeded on their way to the convent. What the bashful, conscious Idly would have done without her sister's help, it is difficult to guess. Marietta busied herself about all, won over the priest to the sudden marriage, contrived to put up articles of dress for the fair bride's journey, and thinking of everything, seemed the guardian angel of the lovers. Ladislas arrived at the convent. He had been successful with the master of the steam packet, and all was prepared. Marietta heard this from his own lips, and carried the happy news to Idly. He did not see her till they met at the altar, where, kneeling before the venerable priest, they were united forever, and now time, as it sped on, gave them no moment to indulge their various and overpowering feelings. Idly embraced her sister again and again, and entreating her to join them speedily in Paris, made her promise to write, and then, escorted by her husband, proceeded to the Sully, on board of which most of the party were already assembled. The steamer proceeded on its course. Farewell to Naples, that Elysian city as the poet justly calls it, that favourite of sea and land and sky. The hills that surround it smooth their rugged summits and descend into gentle slopes and opening defiles to receive its buildings and habitations. Temples, domes, and marble palaces are ranged round the crescent form of the bay, and above them arise dark masses and wooded clefts and fair gardens, whose trees are ever vernal. Before it the mighty sea binds its wild streams, and smooths them into gentlest waves, as they kiss the silver, pebbly shore and linger with dulcet murmur around the deep-based promontories. The sky, who has not heard of the Italian sky? One intense diffusion, one serene omnipresence, forever smiling above the boundless sea, and forever bending in azure mirth over the flowing outlines of the distant mountains. They first passed Castellamare, and then the abrupt promontories on which Sorrento and ancient Amalfi are situated. The sublimity and intense loveliness of the scene wrapped in delight each bosom. The hills, covered with ilex, dark laurel, and bright-leaved myrtle, were mirrored in the pellucid waves, which the lower branches caressed and kissed as the winds waved them. Behind arose other hills, also covered with wood, and more distant, forming the grand background, was sketched the huge ridge of lofty Apennines. Still proceeding on their way to Piastum, they exchanged the rocky beach for a low and dreary shore. The dusky mountains retired inland, and leaving a waste, the abode of malaria and the haunt of robbers, the landscape assumed a gloomy magnificence, in place of the romantic and picturesque loveliness which had before charmed their eyes. Ladislas leaned from the side of the vessel, and gazed upon the beauty of nature with sentiments too disturbed for happiness. He was annoyed by the unpropitious presence of the idle and the gay. He saw Idly in the midst of them, and did not even wish to join her while thus situated. He shrank into himself and tried, forgetting the immediate discomforts of his position, to think only of that paradise into which love had led him, to compensate for his patriotic sorrows. He strove patiently to endure the tedious hours of this never-ending day, during which he must play a false part and see his bride engaged by others. While his attention was thus occupied, the voice of the Princess Dashkoff startled him, and looking up he wondered how a face that seemed so bland, and a voice that spoke so fair, could hide so much wickedness and deceit. As the hours passed on, his situation became irksome in the extreme. Once or twice he drew near idly, and tried to disengage her from the crowd, but each time he saw the princess watching him stealthily, while his young bride, with feminine prudence, avoided every opportunity of conversing apart with him. Ladislas could ill endure this. He began to fancy that he had 1,000 things to say, and that their mutual safety depended on his being able to communicate them to her. He wrote a few lines hastily on the back of a letter with a pencil, conjuring her to find some means of affording him a few minutes' conversation, and telling her that if this could not be done before, he should take occasion, while the rest of the company were otherwise occupied, to steal from them that evening to the larger temple, and there await her, joining him, for that everything depended on his being able to speak to her. He scarcely knew what he meant as he wrote this, but, driven by contradiction and impatience, and desirous of learning exactly how she meant to conduct herself on the princess's disembarking at Naples, it seemed to him of the last importance that his request should be complied with. He was folding the paper when the princess was at his side, and addressed him. "A sonnet, Count Ladislas, surely a poetic imagination inspires you, may I not see it?" And she held out her hand. Taken unaware, Ladislas darted at her a look which made her step back trembling and in surprise. Was she discovered? The idea was fraught with terror, but Ladislas, perceiving the indiscretion of his conduct, masked his sensations with a smile and replied, "They are words of a Polish song, which I wish idly to translate for the amusement of your friends," and, stepping forward, he gave idly the paper and made his request. All pressed to know what the song was. Idly glanced at the writing and, changing colour, was scarcely able to command her voice to make such an excuse as was rendered necessary. She said that it required time and thought, and that she could not at that moment comply, then crushing the paper between her trembling fingers, began confusedly to talk of something else. The company interchanged smiles, but even the princess only suspected some lover-like compliment to her protégé. "Nay," she said, "we must at least know the subject of these verses. What is it? Tell us, I entreat you." "Treachery," said Ladislas, unable to control his feelings. The princess became ashy pale, all her self-possession fled, and she turned from the searching glance of the Pole with sickness of heart.